This single girl was about to turn off the light to sleep. Suddenly a man appeared next to her. The man covered the girl's mouth without saying a word. He gave the girl a shot of anesthetic. The poor girl only struggled a few times, soon lost consciousness. When the girl woke up again, found herself in a metal cage. The girl's name was Annie, originally a waitress in a restaurant. That day he received a male customer. This man fell in love with Annie at first sight. He immediately wanted to go out with Annie, but Annie was not interested in him at all. He just shrugged it off and left. But the man did not stop there. His name was Jack. He was a handyman at the vet hospital. Ever since he met Annie, he started browsing Annie's social pages, studying her hobbies and interests, and started following Annie, pretending to ride the same bus, creating various chance encounters in an attempt to gain Annie's affection. But each time Annie clearly said that she was not interested, Jack was still determined to find Annie's place. Annie also noticed something. She also discussed with her girlfriend that she felt someone was following her, but her best friend had a bad taste in her mouth and said she was being paranoid. That day Jack followed Annie to a bar. David, the bartender, was Annie's ex-boyfriend. Jack took advantage of Annie out of the air, and then he confessed his love to her. Annie tried to avoid him, but he also blocked the way. Angry, Annie slammed Jack with her bag several times. After running into the bar, he told David that he was being harassed. David went up to Jack and beat him up. The skinny Jack had no chance to fight back. Finally, David threw him out of the bar. Jack was lying on the floor. Suddenly, he saw a notebook on the ground. This notebook is just Annie hit him with a bag to transfer out. Jack arrived home and opened the notebook. He found that it was full of diary written by Annie. He read a few pages and was greatly shocked. Jack finished reading and thought about it all night long. Finally decided to imprison Annie. In the abandoned utility room of the hospital, there was an abandoned basement. Jack went down the stairs, tried to push the light switch. There was still electricity. Jack looked around and found that this was a natural place to be imprisoned. Taking advantage of his work, take advantage of his position, Jack secretly welded a cage in the basement. Once everything was in place, Jack began his plan. At night, he climbed up the fire escape ladder to Annie's apartment. Annie was drinking water in her bedroom. She heard a rattle at the window of her room outside. She put down her glass and came out to see what was going on, thinking it was just the wind. So she went over and closed the window again. She turned around and went back to her bedroom and closed the door. Just got into bed and turned off the light to go to sleep. Then the scene at the beginning of the video happened. A frightened Annie struggled in the cage all night. The next day Jack came to work and turned on the lights again. After a night of tossing and turning, Annie was exhausted. Jack put the food he brought to the cage. Annie cowered in the corner, shivering. The food didn't move. Jack also kindly brought a stainless steel change of basin. I have to say, the design of this cage is very reasonable. But no matter what Jack said, Annie's response is to get the hell out of the way. Seeing that there is still no communication at all, Jack took back the food, then turned off the lights and left Annie alone in the basement. After Jack climbed out and left, Annie rubbed a mark on the cage, indicating her first day of captivity. Jack worked as he always did. He didn't come down to see Annie again. 3 days had passed. Annie was starving to death, lying on the floor. Jack came, opened a bottle of water. He gave a little to Annie. This time Annie could not curse anymore, took the water and drank it. Jack told her to slow down. He said he would see her again tomorrow. He said he was going to leave. This time, Annie grabbed Jack's leg. She begged him not to leave her. Jack started to tell Annie he was the owner of this place. Annie needs to watch her behavior from now on. Only by being a good boy would she not be punished. With that out of the way, Jack turned off the lights again and left, leaving Annie alone in this place. Annie, who hadn't eaten for 3 days, grabbed a burger from the floor and ate it. Jack came out of the utility room. He was just pushing up the cleaning cart to leave. A light hit him in the face. It was Mike, the security guard on patrol. Jack explains that he went in to find something. Mike told him to go. After seeing Jack leave, Mike took a flashlight to the utility room. The girl, Annie, is locked into a large metal cage. The man who was holding her, Jack, was sitting next to her. He was not ashamed to say that he felt Annie was very special, so he wanted to save her like this. This man has imprisoned people. Why should he say he was saving her? Seeing that Annie didn't want to talk, Jack left the basement where Annie was imprisoned. At night Annie was squatting in the cage. A Jerry crawled into the cage and touched her leg. Annie looked down and saw it and hid in fear, but then stomped a few feet hard until the Jerry chopped into pieces. It seems that the girl is not as soft as she looks. The next day Jack brought a notebook. Annie immediately recognized it as her lost diary, reaching for it, but Jack snatched it away again. He said he had read the diary. He knew Annie's darkest secrets. It turns out that the seemingly weak Annie is a murderer. A few months ago, Annie was driving around with her girlfriend Jenny. On the way, he said straight away. He directly said that he found out that his boyfriend and Jenny were having an affair. Jenny rushed to explain that she had been drinking too much. It wasn't intentional, but Annie started to increase the gas pedal. The car was going faster and faster. Jenny in the passenger seat was so scared that she kept apologizing, but Annie stepped on the gas pedal. The car quickly lost control, crashed into the wall. Both of them were injured to different degrees. Annie looked down and found she had a long blast in her stomach, next to her best friend murmuring and comforting her. Looking at her best friend, who was completely dead, Annie actually felt a peace inside that she had never felt before. But there was more to the diary than that. The huge change made Annie suffer from a split personality. So before, the best friend she saw was also a fantasy. From then on, Annie worked during the day. Annie became a serial killer at night. She preys on homeless people on the street. Jack didn't believe it when he first read the diary, until he followed Annie. He actually saw her pouring gasoline on the homeless. Then she took out her lighter and threw it at the man without hesitation. Jack admitted that he wanted to save Annie out of love, hoping that Annie would stop what she was doing. Annie finally showed her true colors too. She asked Jack, "Do you know what happens when you put a beast in a cage? What would happen if you put a beast in a cage?" Jack's panicked look is completely exposed. Even with Annie in the cage, he still had no control over her. Annie was demonstrating to him by doing this. Jack was upset. He had been working hard and now he was lethargic. Inside the cage, Annie was happy and pleased. Jack is distracted by his supervisor. She called Jack into her office. She told him to leave if he was caught slacking off. Annie is still locked up in the basement. Jack rushed to promise to work hard in the future. When he got home from work, anxious Jack suddenly figured it out. He immediately returned to work. Mike, the security guard on duty, didn't even look up. He said hello to him. Jack headed inside to the utility room. Mike suddenly remembered that he needed to give him a document, but Jack didn't hear it. He comes into the basement where Annie is being held. Jack pulls out 2 chocolates and throws them in the cage. Annie said they weren't enough. Jack was so proud of himself. "You're so good at this, aren't you? That's all the food you have for today." Annie threw the chocolates out in anger. Jack saw that he had achieved his goal. Then he said, "You're in a cage now. I'm the real owner. If you ever do that again, I'll give you a taste of hunger strike again." After that, Jack turned off the lights and was ready to go. Annie immediately changed tactics. She said she had a dream at night. She dreamed that the 2 of them were living in a wooden house by the sea. When she woke up, she felt like that was the life she wanted. Jack fell in love again. Jack crawled out of the basement and walked out of the utility room unsuspecting. He didn't even notice that Mike was watching him. This isn't the first time Mike has run into Jake out of this abandoned utility room. This time he walked in. He finally found the basement.
Holy shit.
Security guard Mike found the basement of the hospital. There was a girl locked up. The girl rushed to ask for help. She introduced herself as Annie. She was kidnapped by Jack. Mike was shocked and said he didn't expect Jack to be this kind of person. As we were talking here, Jack had come back from outside. When he saw the door of the utility room half open, he felt something was wrong. And then he saw that the basement door had been opened. He understood that it had been discovered. And in the basement, Annie was urging Mike to break the lock. Jack had gone down quietly. Annie looked up and found Jack back. Knowing that there was no hope of escape, immediately and seamlessly switched to signal Jack to sneak attack. Jack almost forgot he was the kidnapper. Annie even helped to attract Mike's attention, took his hand. Jack took the opportunity to hit Mike's head with a flashlight, but his physical defense is too strong. During the fight, Jack stabbed Mike with a knife. He took the opportunity to break free from Mike and run backwards. The angry Mike turned to chase. To gain trust, Annie stretched her leg and tripped Mike. Before Jack could recover from the shock, Annie instructed him to use the brick next to him to hit him. Jack couldn't do it at all, but Annie warned him if Mike went out, the consequences would be unthinkable. After a fierce battle of the minds, Jack still raised the brick and ended up next to Mike. Annie looked at what was happening in front of her with glee. She wanted to pull Jack into the abyss of sin as well. Then, under her guidance, Jack broke Mike into small pieces. This is a pet hospital. The last thing thing you need is a dog. And Mike was disposed of without a trace. Afterwards, Annie offered to make nice. I hope Jack will let him go, so that they could be together later. But Jack refused.
Thought you left.
I do love you.
Poor Jack had to sit around for hours coaxing. Annie just spoke up again. She said that Jack locked him up as a possession, not love. Jack defended himself. He was truly in love, but he couldn't let Annie out. Annie immediately says he doesn't want to get out, but she wanted a proof that Jack loved her. Jack rushed to ask how to prove it.
What? A finger? My finger?
Jack is not stupid either. He didn't say yes to Annie. He left the basement in silence. Back home, Jack was still disturbed. There was no more peace. The next day at work, the detective came over and started investigating Mike's disappearance. Jack's answers were full of holes. The detective was going to review the surveillance. Jack realized that he would soon be exposed. At the end of his rope, Jack lost his mind. He came to Annie ready to prove his love. Annie rushed to cheer him up. Jack proved himself through severe pain. Annie seized the opportunity, quickly grabbed the knife on the ground against herself, forcing Jack to open the cage. Once outside, she kissed Jack. Then, without hesitation, she slit Jack's throat. Annie escaped with her life. A few months later, Annie was living with her ex-boyfriend David. David was watching a football game when his phone rang. He asked Annie to take it for him. Annie picked it up and saw a message from another girl. Looking at the message, angry Annie stares at the kitchen knife on the table. The scene shifts. Annie arrived at an abandoned warehouse. There was a cage in the warehouse. That's right, Jack wasn't dead. Instead, he was locked up by Annie, and you can clearly see Jack had lost his eyesight and his ability to speak. Annie was talking to him like a pet. She almost made a move on David this morning, but she finally managed to hold back, all because she remembered Jack in his cage. Jack was the only one who was dedicated to her.